Imagine being crossed off your own son's wedding guest list, the invitation violently defaced, as if the bond between father and son had never existed. All because you refused to sell the home where your family's love was built. Sitting alone in that silent house, staring at the black ink slashed across my name, I thought I'd lost my only child forever. But then, a mysterious phone call came revealing a horrifying truth I could never have imagined. And from that moment, everything changed. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved unconditionally. At 67, I never thought I'd hold my son's wedding invitation with my name scratched out in black ink. The elegant cream cardstock had become a weapon, each angry stroke cutting deeper than any blade. I sat at my kitchen table in our small Hawthorne District bungalow, where Grace and I raised Ethan for 39 years. Morning light filtered through her faded yellow curtains as I reread the brutal amendment in my son's handwriting. Since you've chosen your house over my happiness, you're not welcome at my future. 6 weeks since this arrived. 6 weeks of wondering how the boy I taught to ride a bike could write such cruelty. Grace would have known what to do. She always reached Ethan when his stubborn streak flared. I picked up her photo from our flower fight days when 5-year-old Ethan covered her laughing face with baking powder. Her green eyes sparkled with the joy that filled our home for 28 years before cancer took her. "What would you tell me, sweetheart?" I whispered, tracing her smile through the glass. The phone rang. Maverick Stone's gruff voice filled the kitchen. "You ready for this fool's errand? Silas Truck's warmed up." My closest friend since Grace's funeral understood loss and what parents do for their children. When I told him my plan to attend Ethan's wedding uninvited, he simply asked pickup time. "Crystal Springs Garden, 11 o'clock. I confirmed. "Fancy place for a fancy wedding? You sure about this kid?" made his feelings clear. I looked around the kitchen where Ethan ate thousands of meals, where Grace bandaged scraped knees and celebrated achievements. Height marks on the doorframe tracked his growth from 3 to 16. This wasn't just a house Celeste wanted me to sell for their extravagant wedding. This was our family's heart. He's still my son. Grace spent her last months worrying his ambition would lead him from what matters. I promised to watch over him, even if he hates you for showing up, especially then. Sometimes love means doing what's right instead of what's easy. As I hung up, something caught my eye. The invitations corner held strange notation. Final notice. Payment due upon receipt. Odd wording for a wedding invitation. I slipped it into my jacket beside the wrapped gift for Ethan. My father's compass, the one that guided him through World War II and me through 40 years of construction. "May you always find your way home," I'd written. The irony wasn't lost. Here I was trying to guide my son home while he sailed away from everything Grace and I taught about family loyalty and love. But that morning phone call would change everything. The house felt different without her voice echoing through these rooms. 12 years since Grace passed, and I still caught myself listening for her footsteps on the hardwood floors we'd refinished together when Ethan turned 10. I walked to the living room where her presence lingered strongest. The piano she'd played every Sunday morning sat silent. Now sheet music still folded to her favorite hymn. Above it hung our wedding photo from 1978, 2 kids, from working-class families who thought love could conquer anything. Turns out we were right, at least for 28 years. Grace had been the heart of this home, the one who made our modest bungalow feel like a palace. She'd sewn curtains from clearance fabric, planted the garden that still bloomed each spring, and filled every corner with laughter and warmth. When Ethan was small, she'd read to him in that rocking chair by the window, her voice painting pictures of distant lands and brave heroes. "Every child needs to know they're loved unconditionally," she'd tell me as we watched him sleep. "That's the foundation everything else builds on." She'd been right about so many things. Right about buying this house when everyone said we couldn't afford it. Right about having another baby after 3 miscarriages nearly broke us both. Right about Ethan's talent for building things, encouraging his architectural dreams when he was still playing with blocks. But she'd also seen something troubling in our son as he grew older. The way he'd started measuring his worth against his classmates' possessions. How he'd grown embarrassed by our simple lifestyle as his ambitions expanded. Grace worried that his drive for success might cost him something more valuable. "Promise me?" she'd whispered during those final weeks, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Promise you'll remind him what really matters. Family, love, the things that last." I'd promised, though, I wasn't sure I understood the depth of her concern then. Ethan had just graduated from Portland State with his architecture degree full of plans and possibilities. He seemed like the same loving son who'd helped me build the deck, where Grace spent her last good summer watching hummingbirds visit her flower garden. The change came gradually after she died. Ethan threw himself into work, building his firm from nothing into something respectable. I was proud of his success, but somewhere along the way, the boy who used to help neighbors fix their porches became a man who moved in circles where people like me didn't belong. Then came Celeste Morgan 3 years ago, and everything shifted. I'd known something was wrong the first night he brought her home. Not wrong with her exactly, but wrong with how she looked at our life. Her eyes had swept over Grace's handmade quilts, our mismatched furniture, the family photos covering every surface, and I'd seen judgment there. Polite judgment, but judgment nonetheless. "What a charming little place," she'd said with a smile that never reached her eyes. So much character. Character, code for old small beneath her standards. But Ethan had been smitten, eager to please this sophisticated woman who represented everything he thought he wanted. I watched my son slowly disappear into someone I barely recognized, someone who'd choose status over family appearances, over authenticity. Grace would have seen through Celeste immediately. She had an instinct for people could spot a false heart from across a room. "Trust your gut, Silas," she'd always said. "It rarely lies." My gut had been screaming warnings for 3 years. 3 years ago, everything changed when Ethan brought her home for the first time. I remembered that October evening with painful clarity. The doorbell had rung just as I was finishing dinner, and there stood my son with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Celeste Morgan was stunning in that polished, untouchable way that made ordinary men like me feel inadequate just standing in the same room. "Dad, I'd like you to meet Celeste," Ethan had said, his voice carrying a nervousness I hadn't heard since he was 16 asking to borrow the car. "Celeste, this is my father, Silas." She'd extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile bright and practiced. "Mr. Hayes, what a pleasure. Ethan talks about you constantly." Even then, something felt rehearsed about her words, but I dismissed it as first meeting jitters. I'd invited them in, watching as her eyes swept over our modest living room, with what I'd mistaken for curiosity rather than calculation. "What a charming home," she'd said, her gaze lingering on Grace's handmade quilts draped over the sofa. "So much character. You can really feel the history here. Character. History." I'd learned later that these were Celeste's code words for old small and beneath her standards. But that night, I'd been flattered by her attention as she asked about the family photos covering the mantelpiece, about Grace's garden, visible through the kitchen window, about how long we'd lived in the neighborhood. "Ethan mentioned you built most of the deck yourself." She'd continued stepping onto the back porch where Grace had spent her final summer watching hummingbirds. "How impressive. Such craftsmanship is rare these days." I'd swelled with pride, not recognizing the way she was cataloging everything, filing away. Information about our property, our lifestyle, our vulnerabilities. Ethan had been watching her with such adoration that I'd wanted to like her for his sake, even as something deep in my gut whispered warnings. The evening had progressed pleasantly enough. Celeste had complimented my cooking, laughed at my stories about Ethan's childhood mishaps, and asked thoughtful questions about my construction work. She'd seemed genuinely interested when I'd shown her the photo albums Grace had so carefully maintained, documenting every milestone of Ethan's life. But there had been moments, fleeting expressions when she thought no one was looking. The way her smile faltered when I'd mentioned our tight budget during Ethan's college years. How she'd quickly changed the subject when I'd talked about Grace's illness and the medical bills that had drained our savings. Small things that nagged at me without clear reason. "Your father's wonderful," she'd told Ethan as they prepared to leave, but she'd said it while looking at me with eyes that seemed to be measuring my worth in dollars and cents. After they'd gone, I'd called Grace's sister Margaret, needing to talk through my unease with someone who'd known Grace's intuition about people. "She's beautiful, I'll give her that," Margaret had said after I'd described the evening. But Grace always said the prettiest packages sometimes hold the ugliest surprises. "What does your gut tell you, Silas?" My gut had been screaming warnings, but I'd ignored them for Ethan's sake. He'd seemed happier than he'd been since Grace died, more animated and hopeful. If Celeste could bring light back to my son's eyes, who was I to question her motives? How blind I'd been. Over the following months, I'd watched Ethan transform. His visits became less frequent, always rushed, often canceled at the last minute for social obligations I wasn't invited to share. When he did come by, he seemed different. More concerned with appearances, more critical of our neighborhood, more eager to impress people whose approval had never mattered to him before. Celeste had been working on him from the beginning, I realized now, planting seeds of dissatisfaction, making him ashamed of his roots, positioning herself as his ticket to a better life. And I'd been too grateful for his happiness to see the manipulation happening right before my eyes. I should have trusted my instincts that first night. The dinner that destroyed our relationship happened on a rainy Tuesday in December 4 months ago. Ethan had called that morning, sounding unusually formal. Dad, Celeste, and I would like to take you to dinner tonight. We have some exciting news to share. I should have sensed something was off when he chose Le Bernardin, a fancy restaurant in downtown Portland, where the cheapest entree cost more than my weekly budget. But grateful for the invitation, I arrived early, nervous as a teenager on his first date. When I walked in, they were already seated. Celeste looked stunning, her black dress accentuating her figure, while Ethan fidgeted with his tie, habit from his childhood. "Dad, you look wonderful," he said, standing to embrace me, but his hug felt stiff. "Thank you for coming." Celeste offered her cheek for a kiss, her perfume overwhelming. "Silas, how lovely to see you. I hope you're hungry." The first hour passed pleasantly enough. They announced their engagement, showing me the enormous diamond ring. I congratulated them, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "We're planning a beautiful wedding," Celeste gushed, pulling out her phone to show me photos of Crystal Springs' rhododendron garden. 300 guests, a string quartet, and dinner by the best caterer. The numbers she tossed around made my head spin. 50,000 for the venue, 20,000 for flowers. How could Ethan afford this? "Dad, what we need is your help," Ethan said, suddenly serious. My heart sank. Celeste explained that if I sold my house, I could live comfortably at Sunset Manor, while financing their extravagant wedding dreams. "This is where Grace and I built our life," I said, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "I'm not selling." Ethan's face hardened. "You're being selfish. This is why I didn't want to ask you. You're too attached to that house." "I maintain it just fine," I shot back, "and I'm not ready for a nursing home." "What's wrong with living in a community with people your age?" Celeste interjected smoothly, her smile unwavering. "You'd be happier there." What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Ethan accused me of holding him back. Celeste suggested I didn't care about his happiness. They painted me as a stubborn old man standing in the way of their future. "Help us start our life properly," Ethan declared coldly, "or don't expect to be part of it. Your choice, Dad." They left abruptly, and I was left staring at the lavish bill, feeling like a ghost in my own life. That was the last time Ethan spoke to me. The silence that followed Ethan's ultimatum was deafening. For 4 long months, I heard nothing from my son. No phone calls, no texts, not even a birthday wish in February. I tried reaching out countless times, leaving voicemails and sending texts that never received a response. The house felt enormous without him. I found myself cooking for 2 out of habit, only to sit alone with an empty plate across the table. The guest room, once filled with his laughter, remained untouched. His architectural books gathered dust, and the toys he played with as a child seemed to mock me from their shelves. Spring arrived in Portland, and Grace's garden bloomed as it did every year. The daffodils pushed through the soil with determination, a reminder of the life we built together. I tended to the garden meticulously, knowing Grace would have wanted it perfect for Ethan's wedding, even if I wouldn't be there. Maverick Stone, my closest friend since Grace's passing, became my lifeline during this dark time. A retired firefighter, he understood loss and the lengths a parent would go for their child. He started showing up for coffee every Tuesday morning, uninvited but welcomed. "You're looking rough, Silas," he said one morning, concern etched on his face. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" I shrugged, unwilling to admit sleep had become elusive, filled with dreams of Ethan calling for me in the night. "I'm fine, Mav, just getting older." "Bullshit. This is about your boy, isn't it? The one who thinks he's too good for his old man now." I finally opened up about Ethan's upcoming wedding and how I'd been excluded. "I wasn't supportive enough," I muttered, the words bitter on my tongue. "Their plans or their demands," Maverick pressed. "There's a difference between supporting your kids' dreams and letting them walk all over you." After sharing everything, Maverick had been firm. "You need to fight for your boy. Grace would have seen right through that woman. Trust your gut, Silas. The wedding invitation arrived. The next day, my name crossed out in angry black ink. But instead of breaking me, it ignited a fire within. Ethan was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and I had to stop it. I'm going to that wedding, I declared to Maverick that evening as we sat on my back deck watching the sunset. Even though you're not invited, especially because I'm not invited. Something doesn't add up here. The expensive wedding, the pressure to sell the house, it's manipulative. Maverick nodded. Your gut's trying to tell you something. Grace always said to trust my instincts. I ignored them once with Celeste. I won't make that mistake again. That night, I finally slept soundly for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but I would face it with the strength Grace always believed I had. I would be there for Ethan, ready to fight for our bond. The phone rang at exactly 8:30 on the morning of Ethan's wedding, just as Maverick pulled into my driveway. I almost didn't answer. We were already running behind schedule, and I'd spent the last hour second-guessing our plan to crash the ceremony. But something about the persistent ringing made me pick up the receiver. Is this Silas Hayes, Ethan Hayes' father? The voice belonged to a young woman nervous and breathless. Yes, who's calling? My name is Iris Blackwood. We've never met, but I used to be Celeste's roommate. I think there's something you need to know about your son's wedding. About Celeste. My blood ran cold. Through the window, I could see Maverick checking his watch, clearly wondering what was taking so long. I'm listening, I said, sinking into the kitchen chair. Celeste Morgan has done this before, Mr. Hayes. 3 times. She targets successful men whose families have assets, manipulates them into pressuring their parents to liquidate property for expensive weddings, then breaks off the engagement after securing access to joint accounts and wedding funds. The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you certain? I helped her once, Iris admitted, shame evident in her voice. With her second fiancé, Daniel, I thought I was helping a friend, but I was enabling a predator. She convinced his mother to take out a reverse mortgage on her home. $80,000 for a wedding that never happened. My hands began to shake. What about the first one? Michael's parents sold their vacation cabin. $60,000. Same pattern every time. Celeste walks away with the money while the families are left devastated financially and emotionally. Why are you telling me this now? Iris's voice cracked. Because last night she called me drunk and laughing. She said, and I quote, another sentimental old fool who'll probably die alone in a nursing home while I enjoy his liquidated equity. She was talking about you, Mr. Hayes, about how she'd convinced Ethan you were selfish for not selling your house. The cruelty of those words stole my breath. I closed my eyes, seeing Celeste's practiced smile, remembering how she'd cataloged every detail of my home that first night. There's more, Iris continued. Celeste lost her job 3 months ago. She was fired for falsifying client billings. She's been pretending to go to work while hiding massive credit card debt. She needs Ethan's income and your house equity to cover her gambling debts. Do you have proof of any of this? I've been documenting everything since Daniel's suicide attempt. Screenshots of text conversations, copies of the wedding contracts, photos of the properties the other families sold. And I recorded last night's call. The shame was overwhelming. He moved back with his mother, barely leaves the house. That's when I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Through the kitchen window, I saw Maverick getting out of his truck, concern written across his weathered face. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 2.5 hours. Can you get this evidence to me? I asked urgently. I'm already on my way to Crystal Springs, Iris said, her voice determined. I'll meet you there with everything. Mr. Hayes, your son, needs to see this before he makes the biggest mistake of his life. I won't let Celeste destroy another family. How will I find you? I'll be near the garden entrance with a blue folder. I have photos of all the evidence, the audio recording on my phone, everything your son needs to see the truth. After hanging up, I turned to Maverick, who was now standing in my doorway. We need to get to Crystal Springs, immediately. There's a woman named Iris who's going to help us save Ethan. What kind of help? Maverick asked, grabbing his keys. The kind that's going to prove Celeste is a fraud who's done this to 3 other families. As we rushed to the truck, one thought echoed in my mind. Grace had been right to worry about Ethan's judgment, but she'd also been right about something else. Truth had a way of surfacing even when buried deep. Today the truth would save my son. Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden had never looked more beautiful or felt more urgent. Maverick's truck roared through Portland's winding roads. toward the upscale venue where my son was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The spring morning was perfect for a wedding, but there was nothing blessed about what was happening today. There, I said, pointing to a young woman near the entrance clutching a blue folder. That's Iris. The parking lot was already filling with luxury cars and well-dressed guests. Through the gates, I could see white chairs arranged perfectly in elaborate floral arch, where Ethan would soon pledge his life to a predator. Iris Blackwood was younger than expected, maybe 30, with auburn hair and nervous energy. Relief flooded her face when she saw us. Mr. Hayes, I'm so glad you made it. We don't have much time. She opened the folder with trembling fingers, revealing devastating evidence. Screenshots of Celeste laughing about managing another mark. Bank statements showing hidden debts. Photos of properties previous victims' families had sold. This audio recording is the most damning, Iris said, holding up her phone. From last night. She was drunk bragging about manipulating your son. Maverick whistled low. How did she fool Ethan for 3 years? She studies her targets, exploits their weaknesses. Ethan wanted to fit into her world so badly he couldn't see what she really was. Through the gates, guests were taking their seats. Quinn Torres, Ethan's best man, was directing groomsmen near the arch. My son was somewhere in that crowd, believing he was building a future with the woman he loved. How do we reach him? I asked. I'm not welcome here. It's service entrance on the east side, Iris replied. Catering staff have been going in and out all morning. If we find Quinn, he might get Ethan alone. We circled the garden's perimeter, staying low between manicured hedges. The service entrance bustled with staff carrying trays and arrangements, too busy to notice 3 determined intruders. Follow my lead, Iris whispered, adopting a confident stride. We're with the wedding coordinator. It worked. We slipped into the preparation area, a maze of tents hidden from guests. I could hear the string quartet warming up nervous laughter that always accompanies weddings. There, Maverick pointed to Quinn Torres in his black tuxedo near the groom's tent. My hands shook as I approached him, evidence clutched against my chest. Quinn's eyes widened in recognition, then confusion. Mr. Hayes, what are you doing here? Ethan said you weren't coming. Quinn, I need 5 minutes with my son. There's something he must see before he walks down that aisle. The young man took in my desperate demeanor. Iris's nervous presence, Maverick's grim determination. Sir, the ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Ethan's already stressed. Please, I interrupted, my voice breaking. I'm his father. If I'm wrong, I'll leave quietly and never bother him again. But if I'm right, I'm the only one who can save him. Quinn stared at me, then nodded slowly. He's in the prep tent. But Mr. Hayes, if this goes badly, it won't, I said, though my heart was racing. Truth has a way of setting things right. As Quinn led us toward the tent where my son waited, I silently thanked Grace for giving me the courage to fight for the people I loved, even when they couldn't see they needed saving. The moment I stepped into the groom's preparation tent, I saw my son as I hadn't in months. Not the cold, distant man who'd cut me from his life, but the boy who used to run to me when thunderstorms frightened him. Ethan stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting his bow tie with the same nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. When he saw me in the reflection, his face went through a series of emotions. Shock, confusion, anger, and something that might have been relief. Dad, what are you doing here? His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm here because I love you, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. And because you're about to marry a woman who's been lying to you about everything. His face hardened. Get out. I made it clear you weren't welcome here. Ethan, please. Just listen for 2 minutes. I held up the blue folder. This woman has evidence that Celeste has done this before. To 3 other men. 3 other families. That's insane, Ethan snapped, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Iris stepped forward, her voice calm but urgent. My name is Iris Blackwood. I was Celeste's roommate for 2 years. She's a predator, Ethan. She targets successful men whose families have assets, manipulates them into pressuring their parents to liquidate property, then disappears with the money. You're lying, Ethan said, but his conviction was wavering. I opened the folder, pulling out the most damning pieces of evidence. These are text messages where she laughs about managing another mark. Financial documents showing she was fired 3 months ago for embezzlement. Photos of houses that other families sold to pay for weddings that never happened. Ethan's hands shook as he took the papers, scanning them with the analytical mind that had made him a successful architect. I watched his face change as the reality sank in. "This can't be real," he whispered. "There's more," Iris said, gently pulling out her phone. "She called me last night drunk. She said things about you, about your father, that no one in love would ever say." The audio recording filled the tent with Celeste's voice slurred, but unmistakable. "Another sentimental old fool who'll probably die alone in a nursing home while I enjoy his liquidated equity. Ethan's even easier to manipulate than the others. So desperate for approval, so conveniently estranged from Daddy." The color drained from Ethan's face. He sank into a nearby chair, the evidence scattered around him like the pieces of his shattered world. "She said she loved me," he whispered. "She loves what you can provide," I said softly, kneeling beside his chair. "Your income, your potential, your family's assets. But not you, son. Never you." Quinn appeared at the tent entrance, his face pale. "Ethan, they're asking for you. The ceremony is supposed to start in 5 minutes." Ethan looked up at his best friend, then at me, then at the evidence that had destroyed his faith in the woman he'd planned to marry. "I need to see her. I need to hear this from her own mouth." "Are you sure that's wise?" Iris asked. "She's very good at manipulation, at turning situations around." "I have to know," Ethan said, standing with new resolve. "I have to look her in the eyes and ask her if any of it was real." We followed him through the garden's backstage area toward the bridal preparation suite. Guests were seated, the string quartet was playing, and somewhere in that beautiful setting, a woman was putting the finishing touches on an elaborate deception. Ethan knocked on the door of the bridal suite. "Celeste, I need to speak with you." "Darling, you can't see me before the ceremony," came her melodic voice. "It's bad luck." "Open the door, Celeste, now." Something in his tone must have alarmed her, because the door opened immediately. Celeste stood there in her wedding gown, radiant and perfect, her smile faltering when she saw me standing behind Ethan. "What is he doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with barely concealed panic. "He brought me some interesting reading material," Ethan said, holding up the evidence. "Care to explain why your former roommate has recordings of you laughing about manipulating me?" Celeste's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then she recovered tears, springing to her eyes with practiced ease. "Darling, I don't know what lies she's told you, but—" "Stop," Ethan said quietly. "Just stop. I've seen the evidence. I've heard your voice on that recording. I know about Michael and Daniel and the families you destroyed." For a heartbeat, Celeste maintained her innocent facade. Then something shifted in her expression, and the woman my son had fallen in love with disappeared entirely, replaced by someone I'd always known was lurking beneath the surface. "You ungrateful fool," she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Who do you think would want you without me? You're nothing but a small-time architect with daddy issues and a pathetic need for approval." The cruelty in her words was breathtaking, but they had an unexpected effect. Instead of breaking Ethan, they seemed to free him. He stood straighter, his voice clear and strong. "You're right about one thing," he said. "I did need approval. So desperately that I almost lost the most important person in my life." He turned to me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." Celeste's composure cracked completely. "This isn't over," she hissed, pushing past us toward the garden exit. "You'll regret this." But she was wrong. As I watched my son remove his boutonniere with hands that no longer shook, I knew the only thing we'd regret was the time we'd lost to her manipulation. The truth had finally set us both free. The drive home was quiet, but not empty. Ethan sat in Maverick's passenger seat, still wearing his wedding shirt, but having discarded the bow tie. The afternoon sun streamed through windows as we wound through familiar Portland streets, past landmarks that had shaped our shared history. "I can't believe I almost married her," Ethan said finally. 3 years, Dad. 3 years with someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. "She was very good at what she did," I replied. "She studied you, became exactly what you thought you needed. But you saw through her from the beginning." I considered carefully. "I sensed something wasn't right, but ignored my instincts because I wanted you happy. Your mother would have seen through Celeste immediately." At Grace's mention, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I've been so angry since she died. Angry at you for reminding me of what we lost. Angry at myself for not being there enough. She knew you loved her. That's all that mattered. I threw myself into work thinking that would make the pain disappear. When Celeste made me feel important, sophisticated," he shook his head, "I lost sight of what really mattered." "What really matters?" I asked. This Ethan gestured toward our modest neighborhood. Family. Roots. People who love you for who you are, not what you provide. He faced me fully. I'm sorry, Dad. For everything I said, for cutting you out, for choosing her over you. You were manipulated by a professional, I said. You don't need to apologize. But I should have trusted you. Trusted the values Mom taught us. His voice cracked. She always said family comes first. As Maverick pulled into our driveway, Mrs. Peterson waved from her garden. This was our community where people knew our names and cared about our well-being. Inside the house welcomed us like an old friend. Ethan moved through familiar rooms with wonder, pausing at Grace's photo on the kitchen table. I could almost hear her laughing, he said gently. She'd probably say I always had to learn things the hard way. She'd be proud you saw the truth when it mattered, I replied, making coffee. It takes courage to walk away from a public mistake. What do I do now? The explanations I'll have to make. Tell the truth, then rebuild, starting with what matters. As coffee brewed, Ethan sat where he'd done homework as a child, where Grace had bandaged scraped knees and celebrated achievements. Can I stay tonight? I don't want to face the apartment yet. This is your home, I said, placing a mug before him. Always has been, always will be. We talked until sunset, sharing stories, rebuilding the bridge Celeste had tried to burn. As darkness fell, I realized Grace had been right about everything. Love was the foundation. Family was the treasure. Sometimes the worst thing that happened was exactly what you needed to find your way home. The wedding that never happened had given me back my son. That was worth more than any ceremony could ever be. Sometimes the greatest betrayal stories teach us the most profound lessons about unconditional love. Silas's journey reminds us that a parent's heart never gives up even when children lose their way. Like the most powerful grandpa stories passed down through generations, this tale proves that wisdom and persistence can save families from destruction. God has a way of revealing truth exactly when we need it most. Just as he guided Silas to trust his instincts about Celeste, the Lord places the right people in our path at crucial moments. When Iris called that wedding morning, it wasn't coincidence, it was divine intervention protecting a family. The deepest betrayal stories often involve manipulation by those we trust most, but they also offer opportunities for redemption. Ethan's deception by Celeste shows how easily we can be led astray by worldly desires, forgetting the values our families taught us. Yet God's grace always provides a path back home. Among the most touching grandpa stories are those where elderly wisdom saves younger generations. Silas proved that experience teaches us to recognize deception, that age brings clarity, and that love never stops fighting for family. These betrayal stories remind us that material wealth means nothing without genuine relationships. The house Celeste wanted sold wasn't just property. It was a sanctuary of memories and belonging. True treasure lies in people who stand by us. Like the best grandpa stories, this shows that ordinary people doing extraordinary things for love can change everything. When we trust divine guidance and fight for what's right, miracles happen. If this moved your heart, share it with someone needing hope today. Comment below about a time family love saved you from disaster. Subscribe for more inspiring stories and hit that notification bell for powerful tales of faith, family, and redemption.